Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Peacock. My guest today is Iain Abernethy, a well-known expert on practical karate training and kata application and an advocate of traditional martial arts practice. In this episode, Iain presents his own view of kata as a process of 4 inextricable stages. 1. Solo practice. 2. Functional application. 3. Principle-based partner practice. And 4. Live partner practice or kata-based sparring. While most other traditional martial arts view kata as a solo exercise that must be translated into practical techniques, Iain sees solo practice, application, and sparring as all one and the same process entailed by the kata system. Iain also explains what kata-based sparring is, why he hates one-step sparring, and the necessity of bringing modern training methods into traditional martial arts practice. No matter who you are, this episode is simmering over with interesting and helpful discussion. So if you're excited to dive in, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher now.
Appreciate you doing this, by the way, and I know it hasn't been easy to organise, so I'm really grateful to you for your patience and been flexible with my schedule as well. It's really good of you.
Oh, no problem. I really wanted to make sure I had you on the podcast because I've been following you for just on and off for years and years, and I know you're very well respected. So I'm glad that you decided to come on my show.
Well, I heard some good things about it this week as well. It just goes to show, because I think with the podcast it takes a while to kind of generate that momentum with them, But I saw a guy on Facebook, Twitter it was, who tweeted at me saying you should really listen to this podcast. You'll really enjoy it, and it was yours.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So I thought, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to say, actually, I'm due to go on that. But it just, because there's not that many. Well, there's a number of martial arts podcasts, but there's not as many martial arts podcasts as there are YouTube channels,
Yeah.
So I think people are always looking, if you're a podcast listener, as I am, you're always looking for new ones and good ones, you see. So it's, I'll ratchet it out for you. I'll send it across, but I thought it was kind of cool how, nothing escapes it.
Do you know who that was? Because I'm not on Twitter, so that just blows me away.
Yeah, no, that was, it was me and a few others he'd copied in on it. I think Jesse Enkamp might have been another one that was linked, but he just said, if you haven't listened to this is a podcast, you say. And at first I saw the Combat Learning, I thought, I think that's the one. I clicked over and saw that you'd done, I haven't listened to them yet, but I saw you'd done a couple of episodes. I went, good stuff. So that's a solid start as well, so.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm plodding along, trying to feel my way out. It's a small audience right now, but we're growing week over week, which is exciting. Not a lot of feedback yet. What I have gotten has been really positive, so that's awesome. But
yeah.
You don't ever hit your stride, at least from what I hear, until you got a bigger audience and you get a lot more feedback on what works and what doesn't. But I'm trying my best.
Well, the lovely thing about podcasts as well is, I don't record them as often as I should, really, but they're always there. New people are always discovering them. I get people, asking me about podcasts I made 10 years ago. So, it's not like things like YouTube videos and stuff have a very definite shelf life, where they kind of just fall off the algorithm. But podcasts tend to last a lot longer, I think. So, but when this one goes up, obviously, I'll give it a strong push towards my lists, and I think that's the kind of way in which these things tend to grow. Because then, if people, I'm sure they will, they'll enjoy the one that we've done, and then they'll listen to others. And as I say, I think there's definitely an audience out there hungry for quality podcasts, especially martial arts podcasts, because we're fanatical martial artists, it's we can never consume enough of it, so
no, hey, yeah, we're a strange breed, I guess you could say. I never stop talking about it. It's all I think about all the time for like 20 years.
Yeah, I know it is. I've often thought it'd be wonderful if you could get like a psychologist or sociologist or someone like that just to do a study of us as a subculture, because we are a weird bunch of individuals, And I just think it simultaneously fascinates me and delights me at the same time,
Yeah, oh man, so many weirdos too.
Well, that's it. But I mean, I sometimes it hits me at seminars a lot, really. I mean, I watch large groups of people all hitting, punching, kicking one another, but massively enjoying it.
Yes.
Enjoying the violence that they're inflicting one another, but are not violent people by nature. It's just, there's something very weird going on. So I think in my quest for understanding of myself, I'd like to tell me why I'm weird.
It is weird because certain types of stress at work that are just very, I don't know how to describe it as, I don't know. It's not necessarily a huge deal. It affects me a certain way. I don't really want to go to work, but it doesn't matter how hurt I get at Taekwondo or Jiu-Jitsu or whatever it is I happen to be practicing. I'm never like there's never a thought in my mind when I go back to class, oh man, I hope that doesn't happen today. Like it just doesn't, it's like, this is just what I am, a martial artist. This is what I do. I'm going to go back to martial arts class.
Definitely. And with this lockdown at the moment, I've just found, it dawned on me a few weeks ago. I thought this is the longest I've ever gone in about 40 years without being kicked or punched. Yeah, no normal man should have to, think those thoughts, but I think no for weeks just feels so long, First part, second part, brutal.
Yeah, if you don't spar, you don't train, you don't roll, you don't understand. That's just that's the way it is. Well, I want to ease in here a little bit. I know that most traditional martial artists that are going to listen to this podcast probably know who you are, but for my non-traditional listeners, could you give a quick introduction of yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So we're recording now, are we? Do you want me to jump straight into that?
Yeah, we're recording. I had the recording on before just because I didn't want to miss anything. But
lovely. No, that's good. Name's Iain Abernethy, 48 years old, living Northern England, the true North, not Manchester North. I'm 2.5 hours north of North, right on the Scottish border. Main martial art I've done is karate. That's the one that enthuses me the most and interests me the most. I've done some others, but that's the one that I enjoy the most. I travel quite extensively, or did, teaching martial arts, traditional martial arts with a view to the modern day function and valuing from that perspective. And I've got a fairly strong online presence as well, so I'm fairly easy to find if people want extra background information.
Awesome. I know you're an OG in the space because I saw your email list and your website and your e-zine. You're still publishing that e-zine, right?
No, not for a while. I did have one, but we stopped that a while ago. So OG's I'm old, right? I it's a polite way to say, yeah, I get that.
Well, I mean, I'm not as old as you, but I think I'm dating myself as well there. I remember back when probably, man, you were talking about like a podcast like 10 years ago. I remember going to sleep listening to podcasts from you. Like, just I couldn't get enough information. I was like, I didn't even want to take the break between when I put the phone down and when I went to sleep. I just wanted to keep listening to it.
I do that. That's part of my when I go to sleep. I think podcasts. I've often thought that I should have a lullaby section in them.
So I'm sorry. What was that?
I say I do that too. I listen to podcasts as I sleep. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one. So you view kata a little differently than others, it seems like. So how would you define kata?
Well, I mean, I think, and that's a fundamental point. Is it means different things to different people, which sometimes can be difficult when you're having conversations about it. Because I can talk to fellow karateka, and we're both talking about kata, but what they mean by kata is not what I mean by kata. So fundamentally for me, it's a formal way of doing things. That's effectively what the kata is. With the kata of karate, they're a supplementary form of solo training and a repository of knowledge. And I think one of the big problems with it as well is kata is both simultaneously undervalued and overvalued. So you get people who overvalue it, who just believe that if somehow, by methods as yet unidentified, the physical act of performing a kata will make you a better fighter. Well, I think that's overvaluing it, because I don't believe that. I think it's a part of a whole. It should be part of a process. And the undervaluing of it comes from the other side, is, well, people who maybe haven't seen that process in action, again, can't see how it could ever have any value. And there's a lot of these things I find that it's the nuance that reveals its value, really. So I can talk a little bit more about that. I can talk a little bit more about the process, if you'd like, and how I see that working in brief terms.
Yeah, I would actually love you to talk about the kata process, because to me that's a very novel thing, and it's probably, in my opinion, is the best framework I've come across for making kata workable, especially in a modern training environment, and making it into an actual practical tool.
That's really kind of you to say. No, I'm glad it resonates. But so the way I try and explain it, the model I use, and this is something that's reflected in a lot of the writing of the old masters as well, although they didn't necessarily express it the same way as I do. But there's this understanding of examples being examples of concepts and ideas. These concepts and ideas are adaptable, and that you need to practice them in live and organic ways, So, the process as I describe, I say there's 4 elements to it. So the first element would be the solo kata itself. So we have effectively 2-person drills done solo and stuck end to end. That's effectively what a kata is. So there's that part of it, and that has. It gives a chance for solo practice when you haven't got a training partner. It gives a chance to work visualization. It gives a chance for exercise. So it values in and of itself. But the wider process we would go from the kata and go, well, right, what's the application of the movement? What's the 2-person drill that goes with it? So in my own dojo, they will learn the sequence, not the whole kata necessarily, just even a given sequence, and then immediately they'll say, okay, this is what it represents with a partner, and then they will do that with a partner. So that would be the second element of it, is drilling it with a partner. The third element, and this is the one I think sometimes, I know when I try to explain this to people at seminars, sometimes people struggle with this a little bit, because it depends on your understanding of concepts and principles, really, because they are a little bit ethereal. But then the next thing is, okay, look at that example and what principles is it embodying? What combative concepts are in play here? And then understand that the example is designed to point you towards those combative concepts. So I always use the Bruce Lee line from Enter the Dragon on that one, where he says it's like a finger pointing to the moon, concentrate on the finger and you miss all that heavenly glory. So that's the point. Don't get stuck on the example. Understand that it's just, it's an example of concept. Like Funakoshi said, always perform the kata exactly. Combat is another matter. Nakasone said, don't be shackled by the rituals of kata, but instead move freely according to the opponent's strengths and weaknesses. So you need that element practice to say, this is just one example. What combative principles and concepts are at play here? How can they be expanded upon? And then the fourth stage is live experience of doing it. So you'll have done examples of set pieces in certain ways with a partner to get the ideas and concepts, but obviously from a combative point of view, we need to apply it in a live way. So that would be the process, summed up very briefly, is we've got the solo kata, we've got the 2-person equivalent, we've got working with the principles and concepts, understanding that they're, we're supposed to try and internalize them, so we fight in accordance with them. That's what we're trying to do. And then as part of the overall process is when we gain live and semi-live, depending on the objective of the drill. But we've got ways of allowing those things to flow organically in live practice as well.
Awesome. So the thing that I got caught up on is when you say kata, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you say kata, you mean the process which envelops the solo exercise. You don't just mean the solo exercise.
100%, yes, and that's it. And this is why when I'm talking, I will refer to, and people who read my stuff will maybe see this, but they might not realize why I'm doing it. But for that stage 1, I always say solo kata. So people are familiar that when I'm talking about kata, I am talking about that wider process. Because I think this is a problem we have. So sometimes, you'll get people who'll say, well, kata's useless. And I can agree with them fully, depending on what they mean by kata. So if the solo kata is divorced from the wider process, it does become useless. In the same way that if all a boxer ever did was jump rope or hit a bag, if he only does one aspect of his training, is not going to be complete. All the different elements come together, of which kata is one part.
Awesome. Great. Full disclosure. So Iain is on this podcast because I got a little bit too big for my britches, and I thought that I understood his idea of kata. So I was arguing with a mutual friend, and he tagged Iain, and Iain came in and set me straight. So I don't know if y'all have that expression over there across the pond, but over here in this house,
too big for your britches. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, but I mean, it's, but that's a wonderful thing when it results in conversations like this. I always think these are really good, because so much of martial arts discussion online is so much of low quality, and the problem I always have as well. So it's. I've got 20 years worth of material out there, and depending on which parts of it people have been exposed to, they're going to get an incomplete picture. And I always say the internet doesn't do nuance. So those nuance points never get communicated unless people are training in person. But, it was a good online conversation, and we're here chatting now. So it's good.
Yeah. I often come off the wrong way on the internet anyways. I didn't want it to be lost that I'm actually a fan of yours for a long time.
No, well, you and me both. And that's the other thing with it. And by the way, I mean, when we had that discussion, I'm sure it's out there for someone, it was that the central idea was you'd mentioned what my process was. And my point was you'd misunderstood the process. Yeah, but that's it's very easy to do, and obviously there's some onus on me there to make sure that I, as clearly as I possibly can, articulate my own ideas, and it's I'm not always successful in doing that.
Yeah, I mean it's a complex view that you have, and that's that happens. So sometimes what I've found, especially on the internet, is it doesn't matter how well or how meticulously you communicate something. Stuff gets lost in translation because either there just needs to be repetition, or the person's just not listening, or they don't have the categories.
Well, that's and the other problem with it as well, and this is the one I most frequently run into, is because we've all got our own backgrounds and experiences. So, and we don't have a common terminology. So I can talk about what kata is, but someone else can have an entirely different understanding of what kata is to them, or kumite, or sparring, or karate, or self-protection. All of these phrases means different things to different people. So it's sometimes difficult to talk because we don't have a common terminology, you see. So it is, and I often find that as well. It's obviously you're out there publicly, so you obviously get a lot of critique, but a good proportion of that is people who've misunderstood the idea, and again, this is, being honest here, this is where karate people don't help themselves either, because if you wanted to point to the idea of kata being some kind of magical process that you do as an alternative to sparring and somehow it makes you a better fighter, you can find karateka who genuinely hold that view. So then when I come along and say, no, kata can have function, they go, well, no, it doesn't, but they're using the definition that another karateka has given to them. And I can hardly complain that, well, you should follow my definitions, because different people define things in different ways. But yeah, it's not always easy to communicate those nuanced points, I find.
Sure. Yeah. And then that's, I do run into karate guys like that. Most of the people that I deal with is Taekwondo people, which kind of have a lot of the same, almost identical ideas about forms. We call them, depending on the style, pumse. I call them pumse. Some people call them hyung or tol or something like that. What I really run into a lot is actually a lot of guys that even cite you, but what they're saying is actually totally different than what you say. It's like they actually do believe you just do the kata, or you just do the pumse, and that's sufficient. And the sparring is just something that you kind of do, but it's not sufficiently realistic for the street, so you have to do kata in one steps instead.
Yeah, I get that, and I've heard that a lot as well. I've heard.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you right in the middle of the podcast, but I promise it'll only take a second. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Combat Learning email newsletter at combatlearning.com/newsletter. Not only will you never miss an episode of the Combat Learning podcast, you'll get exclusive tips and resources straight to your inbox. And I'm giving away my ebook, An Introduction to Motor Learning for Martial Artists, so you can get up to speed on the central topics of this podcast. But that's not even it. I'll also invite you to our private Facebook discussion group so you can ask any questions you want or discuss any topic related to teaching and learning martial arts. And all of this is 100% free. So go to combatlearning.com/newsletter right now to subscribe and claim all this cool stuff for yourself. That's combatlearning.com/newsletter.
People using my name to justify practices that I don't support.
Right.
So on the basis, well, Iain says kata's good, and what they mean by kata is something entirely different. So they go that this is good. But so the point for me is, if you're talking about like that, the kata and even the self-defense side of it, live practice is mandatory. It's absolutely mandatory. I wrote about that in my first book over 20 years ago. That if people want to learn to apply combative skills in a free-flowing live way, it has to be practiced in a live way. Now, obviously, there's variations in that because it's got to be safe, it's got to be appropriate to the objective, it's got to be relevant for the level of the student. So I'm not saying just throw everyone at the deep end and what happens. There's a process there too. But if live practice is missing, that aliveness is missing, we have problems. And again, this is where karateka are their own worst enemy here as well, because it's not unusual for people to see kata and sparring as separate, disparate entities, that you do one or the other. That's the kata is like an alternative to sparring, whereas it's not supposed to be. If you look at Utsuka, the founder of Wadaru, he said martial arts progress from kata to kumite to komba. Chokimotobu, old Okinawan master, said that the kumite is an actual fight where we use the techniques of the kata to grapple with an opponent. That link has always been there, but now they're often regarded as separate things, and I think that's where a lot of the problem comes from. But again, every martial art's got kata, whether they use that term or not. If I went into a boxing gym, they'd go, okay, let's work some basic combinations. Here's a jab cross. That's a 2-move kata. That's and then they'd show me the kata, and then they'd say, well, this is how you apply it, and here's the variations, and now let's get into the ring and try it. They would use the same 4-stage process.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing out like standard combinations as an example of how kata might appear in a I don't want to say a functional martial art, because I think karate is functional, but in a different non-traditional martial art, because a lot of people will say, well, shadow boxing is an example of kata, which I really disagree with, because it functions very different than a kata, I think, because there's no script, there's no set principles. It's very much creative and you working on what you want to work at that time, and it's different every time very different every time you do it. Whereas set combinations, you learn the combinations because they have some fundamental quality to them, and it's important that you learn those fundamental movement patterns, because they're going to be important for you to kind of scaffold yourself into the combinations that you're going to do live in a fight, in a match, or in a self-defense situation. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
100%. Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it. So for example, I agree with you that the analogy or the comparison of kata and shadow boxing has been one and the same. They're not. But you can do that. I mean, I put an app. I have an app. I put a video in a few weeks ago showing how you could take the techniques of the kata and then freestyle them. So you are shadow sparring with the techniques of the kata. You have taken these set pieces and then sparring. But it's exactly that. It's exactly that. And every martial art I've done has this. They go like, here's some set pieces or drills that we have. These are designed to, as you say, give you some movement patterns to illustrate some basic ideas. But then they need to be given that organic flow. See, I liken it like I sometimes find when I'm teaching analogies, even if they're imperfect, can help get the point across. But I always say kata is like a block of ice. It's unchanging, it's fixed. Whereas what we want to do is we want to apply the heat of combat to it, and then it becomes fluid and malleable, and it changes to the situation. And that's it. Those set pieces shouldn't be preserved. They should be understood for what they are, which is an illustration of an idea.
Cool. So, moving back to like the fourth phase, we were already talking about aliveness. What is kata-based sparring? Like, could you go into that more deeply?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and that again is one of these things that really confuses people, especially if they come into it from that view that kata is one thing and sparring is something else. They go, well, how do these two combine? But the way I use that terminology in my own dojo is basically to demarcate between two large categories of sparring. So if I was just doing sparring, that would be the stuff that I'm trying to do with a view to. Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, but are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Yeah, no problem. Well, yeah, I was just saying, so the kata-based sparring, it does confuse people because people, again, tend to see this idea of kata and sparring as being different entities where there shouldn't really, the two of them should be combined. So in my dojo, if we were doing sparring, those are the kind of skills we would use to outfight another martial artist. So I use the term for that consensual violence. It's something that we agree to do. The kata-based sparring stuff is more akin to the traditional goal of old school karate, which is how do I avoid harm from criminals? So the drills that we do that would utilize the methods of the kata with that objective of close range, non-consensual civilian combat, that's what those drills are there to represent. So that's the broad category, but it's not just a kind of sparring. It's lots of different kinds of sparring, depending on what objectives that we are trying to develop at a given point. So it'd probably help if I give an example. Would that? Yeah. So by way of example, right? So the first kata my students learn is Pinan Shodan. It's called Heian Nidanin Shotokan. And the first part of that kata, we break down into 4 drills, and those 4 drills are primarily about the skills of getting the enemy's arm out the way to land a shot on the jaw or the neck. So they would learn the kata, they would do the drills, the set drills, so they understand the way of controlling the limb to get it out of the way so you can land a shot in close range combat. So we're not talking about guards up 10 feet away. We're talking about, on top of one another, like the self-defense based scenario, cutting through those limbs to land a solid shot to facilitate your escape. So they do that set drill. They would then start to play with the set drill and understand the idea. So that will be stage 3. And they'll then say, right, what I want you to practice now is this skill. So one drill I could do to help them get that is, because I want to isolate this specific skill, is I'll tie them together with belts or stand them on the same mat so they're at close range. And then they've got to land shots on one another. And sometimes we'll do it where one's attacking and one's defending, or we'll mix it up a little bit. But then what they've got to do is they've then got to go, okay, immediately, because of the distance we're at, your limbs are the problem. I can't land the shot. I have to get the limb out of the way. I have to slap it out the way, grab it, pull it, arm drag it, whatever it is to get the limb out of the way. So then they're getting that live practice of the skills and concepts that the kata has introduced. And obviously that's isolating that skill, and later on we can integrate it with all other kinds of skills as well.
Yeah, but isolated, that's a good word. But I think some people, when they hear isolation, they think more of like a line drill. But you mean isolated as in you're isolating like a small group of skills, but it's still alive. It still has those important dynamics.
100%, yeah. So for example, later on, if the higher grades are sparring, they will be throwing, kicking, punching, grappling, locking, all that kind of stuff, elbowing, kneeing. So all of those skills that they were first introduced to from one specific part of the kata will be flowing in there. But I think that's a standard form of practice for us. You watch somebody do something, and if they're doing it well, you let them carry on. If they're not, you go, right, okay, let's stop. Let's isolate that skill, improve that skill, and then reintegrate that skill back into everything else that you do. So when I mean isolate, I just mean literally taking one element and working on that one element in isolation to all the others, just so that it gets the attention that it needs at that given point.
Good. Very good. So you've said before you don't do one-step sparring. Can you explain what those are and why you don't do them?
Yeah, because so the or 3-step or 5-step either. I don't do any of those. So typically within and I can explain the history of this in a second because they are an odd thing. They're just a weird part. Yeah. So the basic history of it then as well, just so for those that don't know where these things came from, because they are they're just bad. I really don't like. I really don't like them. I'm genuinely pretty open-minded about things, and I understand there's more than one way to do things, but I've never had anyone yet explain to me a worthwhile reason to do these, either from a self-defense perspective or a sparring perspective. What happened was karate is an art practiced by a handful of people in Okinawa. They realize it's dying. They realize it's old-fashioned in terms of, people have got guns now, so what do we need to learn martial arts for, All the martial arts are going through this. So what they essentially do is they go, look, what are all the popular kids doing, right? So judo and kendo, even though, those skills, kendo, for example, has no relevance to the modern warfare at that time, they've reinvented them as modern budos. So karate realizes, well, we're going to thrive, we need to do the same thing. So it's no longer karate; it becomes karate do, and they rip off judo's gi, judo's belt, judo's do ethos. They talk about it's about fitness and health because Japan's trying to build up its military. So anything that makes fit, healthy young men is something that's going to be valued and appreciated. And they also look at the forms of practice they're doing. Well, in kendo as warm-ups, they'll quite often tap each other's head with the stick 5 times, and the other guy will come the other way. In judo's nagano kata, they do things in threes quite a lot, where it'll be break the balance, throw. And for those practices, it works very well. So the karate guys see this and go, oh, okay, if that's what we're supposed to do, that's what we'll do. So they invent these weird drills where people step forwards with a very formal lunging punch, and then another one, and then another one. And finally, on the third one or the fifth one, they do something significant. So they're an historical anomaly, really. They should never have really existed. The argument for them is sometimes people say, well, yeah, but they give you timing and distancing. But my retort to that is, yes, the wrong timing and the wrong distancing, because the timing and distancing of one-step sparring in karate, unlike the 3-step drills of judo, doesn't equate to how it's actually applied. So I did these things for years and years and years, as most traditional martial artists do. My own instructor had his strong reservations about them. So he kind of altered them to make them better than they were, but are still not overly convinced by them. He dropped 3-step and 5-step sparring. And then when I started up my own dojo, we just went, okay, they're gone, because we couldn't see any purpose they serve. And I've put up there why I don't do them, and there's people who've came back to me with other arguments, and as yet I haven't heard a good one. I remain open to it, but I haven't heard a good reason why anyone does those. If you want, I mean, the good argument could be we find them fun and we find them interesting, and I regard that. It sounds a little bit flippant, but I regard that that's entirely legit. If somebody goes, this is just a cool thing to do, then, life's short, enjoy it, do things you like doing. But I think it's when there's a claim for these develop a useful, meaningful skill. I've yet to see the process by which that would happen.
Yeah. Well, one of my buddies, Thomas Husky, he was actually one of the early guests on the show. So I've been trying to deconvert him from one-steps, but the way he approaches it is he does not have any standard set of one-steps. So the way he teaches it, the way he practices it, is you have to come up with something spontaneous on the motion that somebody gives you. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that he does is he doesn't really do formal motion. So maybe the person coming at him uses a formal motion, but he does not use a formal motion in response. So I don't know how much better that makes it. He says it builds spontaneous response. I disagree, but it's at least workable, I think.
Yeah, no, that would seem to be a strong step in the right direction, I think. It's like, I don't know how familiar you are with these, but Rory Miller.
Yes.
Yeah, Rory's got excellent material. And Rory Miller has a whole host of drills that he calls one-step drills.
Yeah.
but they are entirely different from what most karateka mean by steps. You see, so again, that confusion can sometimes arise as well. But Rory said this. He said he came up with this concept. He called them one-step drills, and then he saw karate one-step drills and was like, "Oh, that's a little bit different." But that's a little bit more organic and a little bit more free-flowing and unscripted, you know. And we do, you know, you definitely do need a means by which you can build these things up gradually. You can't just throw people in at the deep end because they just get overwhelmed and they don't learn. But I'm not convinced that one steps are meaningful along that way, primarily because the long lunging nature of the attacks isn't what happens in consensual violence. It's not what happens in non-consensual violence either. So I always say that a martial dead end, I'm not quite sure where that can lead to.
It gives you a false sense of timing and distance. I think it's not worth defending against, because you're never going to have to deal with that particular timing. You're going to have to deal with timing that's, like you said, somebody on top of you a lot quicker, a lot closer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It doesn't relate to what we're training for, you see. But again, you know, I'm not one of these people that believes everything has to reduce to function. If people are doing it because we've got martial artists who do medieval swordsmanship. They're never going to use that skill on a battlefield or in self-defense. They just acknowledge that this is something I'm interested in. So if people go, you know, these are interesting because we're interested in them or we enjoy doing them, then that's fine. But I think once you make a claim that it serves a function, well, I'm going to need that demonstrated to me. And as of yet, I've never heard a good argument for those.
Yeah, I honestly wish that martial artists would just say that more often. Like, hey, it's fun. I like to do it, instead of trying to make up like really ad hoc arguments, real haphazard arguments, just off the cuff to justify. I did the same thing too. I'm guilty of it, but it's like when I finally had that breakthrough of like, so what if Olympic sparring is all sport? It's fun. I like it. It's a sport. What's wrong with that? And suddenly everyone's power just went away. And I'm like, oh, my life is so much better now because I don't care.
Well, you know, the funny thing, I filmed a video yesterday that I'll be adding to YouTube in the next month or so. And it was the 5 things that I think martial artists get wrong about self-defense. And number 1 was exactly the point you've just made, is that they use self-defense as the only valid measure. And I think that's such a massive mistake, because so little of martial arts is relevant to self-defense when you actually understand what self-defense properly is. But that doesn't mean it's without value. So, and then we have this thing where people try and cram things into the self-defense box that have no business being there. So, I would say that 90% of what I do is not directly applicable to self-defense, but it might be useful for consensual fighting, for fun and interest, for enjoyment, and these are entirely valid reasons to do things. I think we just need to make sure we get the demarcation right, because any martial artist who thinks that everything they do is relevant to self-defense is flat out wrong, because once you get beyond the first couple of months of training, I mean, I liken it this way. This is an analogy of a friend of mine. He says, like, self-defense is like first aid training. You know, that's what it is. In martial artists, we aim to become surgeons, specialists. You know, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu is the brain surgeon of groundwork. Do you know what I mean? The Thai boxer is the heart surgeon of kicking. You know, we take these things to incredibly high levels, but even the brain surgeon, when self-defense happens, they're going to, so first aid, the brain surgeon's going to apply first aid. In a first aid situation, he's not going to go, okay, get me a scalpel, I'm about to operate. So it's just acknowledging what's relevant for what. And then our training is focused and on point, and we get to enjoy all the fun stuff as well. It just makes it enjoyable.
Yeah. I would challenge any martial artists that get caught up in the argument of, you know, if it's not super functional to real life fighting, you know, why you don't have to justify it. If you have fun doing it, then just do it. Like, you don't have, like, just, hey, it's a sport, I'm having fun. End of story. You know, because most of us are not going to end up in a life or death situation. At least I hope not. And most of the stuff that you practice, even the stuff that's practical self-defense, you're probably not even going to use. Probably just going to use punches and grapples, you know, maybe a low kick. So it's just,
but even that's exactly. But even then, even those that claim, because there's different kinds of functional too. So for instance, I could go to the judo club and I could do something that would be functional in judo, which would be disastrous in self-defense.
Right.
You know, and vice versa. So all of these things, I always think when people go, it works, I think that's a bit of a meaningless statement unless you go, well, works for what? You know, what does it work for? Because there are things that I would like. Give an example, right? Just to illustrate the point. So when in judo, when I was training judo, we learned lots of ways to turn a guy who was face down onto his back, because that's how you win in judo, right? And those methods definitely work. But when would I use them in any other context? A police officer's not going to use those because he wants the guy face down. He doesn't want him face up. Why would he ever turn him over? In self-defense, why would I get on the ground with the guy and try and turn him so his weapons are pointing me? You just wouldn't do it. So I think it's always that matter of going, yes, things can work in one context but not work in another. And that's absolutely fine so long as you're aware of what context you're training for. And I do see it a lot. I think it ends up with them teaching bad self-defense and ignoring the real value of a lot of martial stuff when they try and make everything into self-defense, because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and there's also there's like you mentioned before, there's different types of real world violence. Not all of it is self-defense. Some of it is mutual combat. And that's not to say that you couldn't find yourself toe-to-toe in a self-defense situation that looked like mutual combat, but maybe you were trying to de-escalate the situation. You got a little bit of space and then it ended up devolving and it looked like a kickboxing fight. But in most cases, you're probably going to be very close to the guy. A lot of people they'll show videos and they'll be like, oh, dude, look, this awesome Taekwondo hook kick. I saw this the other day and it was pretty sick. Look, it works in a real fight. Well, yeah, it's a real fight, but it's not a self-defense fight. It's mutual combat. Like the dynamics are a lot different than like a very dire self-defense situation where the person really, really wants to take something from you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this is one of my major irritations, where martial artists use street fighting as a synonym for self-defense. Because they're not the same thing at all, right? For example, you're legally allowed to defend yourself. You're not legally allowed to fight in the street. And because martial artists sometimes don't get the difference and the differing objectives, they train ineffectively for it. And so I'll give a little example of this is, if you take consensual fighting skills that would work physically. So let's say like you've got like an MMA guy, and in MMA competition, the standard thing is if you hit the guy and he drops, you jump on top of him and you carry on hitting him until the referee ends the fight. Right. So that's a really common thing to do. It's a good thing to do within that context. It's a conditioned reaction. Now, if you do the exact same thing, because it worked there perfectly, but if you do the exact same thing in a self-defense scenario, you could suddenly find that you're getting stabbed by one of his friends. And I made a video on this, and I've got some horrific footage of that actually happening to a guy. Does a perfect throw, ends up on the ground, ends up getting his wrist slashed and stabbed repeatedly by this guy's friend. So that can happen. The other thing is, though, that even if it works, right, even if no one else gets involved and the pummel the other guy's face into the pavement, witnesses then misunderstand what happened. And the criminal, because he's a criminal, will lie. And he will say, look, the other guy jumped on me. Look what he did. They ask witnesses and they say, well, what happened? And he said, he jumped on me. Look what he did. So you suddenly find yourself in jail. Now, well done, you won the fight, or you won the street fight, but you've ended up in prison. Because the objective of self-protection is to avoid harm, even when we use physical skills, we should be fighting towards that objective. So it's like, what I'm really trying to do here is get away from this scenario. And I need to hurt this person, disorientate this person, make sure that when I flee, they're not able to give effective chase and get away. So the objective is different. So therefore, the methods you choose to use are also different. And again, it's not, I think we need to get beyond that works, doesn't work, right, wrong thing. It's always context dependent. And just because something works really well in one context doesn't mean it doesn't work in another. But that doesn't mean it hasn't got value, because it does work within the context in which it was designed for.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to circle back real quick and just so that the audience had clarity on this. How would you say that your approach to kata differs from more typical approaches that you see in dojos today?
Radically, I would say. So I see it as part of a process, not a standalone thing. I feel the solo performance has value, but it's not the be all and end all of it, which I think a lot of them do. I think that the aliveness is a big thing, because even those that do the claim to teach applications often do so against the guy who's standing there doing nothing. And I think to get the true value of it and to feel it, then you need that aliveness in practice as well. And it's interesting, really, because again, if you were to type like bunkai is the word that most karateka use for application. So if they were to type bunkai in YouTube, one of the things you often see is people standing there as 8 people attack along angles at the compass points. It's very formal and very choreographed. A practice which was labelled as nonsense and highly unreasonable by Ken Wimabuni as far back as the 1930s. So I think they would be the main things. And it's messy too. That's the other thing. Yeah. Is, we like nice, neat kata because we want to learn that body control and everything else. It goes back to that Funakoshi thing. Always perform kata exactly. Combat is another matter. But when we apply it, it looks ugly. I always say we want the right kind of ugly when we practice. Not ugly because it's just bad technique, but ugly because we just acknowledge that's what fights look like. So there's some big differences. And some people like it and some people don't, but it certainly works for us. It gives us what we want from it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I hear that a lot. Like it should look ugly, it should look dirty. But when you know what you're looking for, it doesn't look as pretty as kata, but it's not quite ugly, right? When you see good technique actually used live, it's not perfect. It's not sterile like you see in a one-step kata, but I know that you can too, at least appreciate the elegance of a good, I guess you could say, maybe a shudo uke, being able to hold somebody off like a spear, and let you transition to another technique, or being able to ride a storm of punches and get into a position where you can throw someone's flat on the ground. Yeah, it doesn't look perfect. It doesn't look like a movie. It doesn't look like a kata demonstration, but there is a certain beauty to it, I guess you could say. I'm just thinking out loud.
No, I would agree with that. It does have an aesthetic of its own. But again, at the seminars, that's a phrase I often use, is it's the right kind of ugly. So I say if it looks neat, pretty, like as in, then it's probably not alive enough. It's probably not realistic enough. If it just looks completely awful, and I've had that as well. Like, I remember visiting a dojo, a friend of mine, and him boasting about how realistic the practice was. And he goes, look how messy it is. And I was like, well, it's just bad. Everything about it, it's just bad. It's bad technique done badly. And he's saying, yeah, but it works. Yeah, because the people they're doing it on are also bad, But I think like the situation you described there is when you see that, like, for example, let's use the example you talked about, that forearm hits the neck, and then you use the structure to be able to create that bit of space in that moment to set up that strike. And you see that movement executed well tactically and technically. And it may not be a picture perfect replication of, the kata, but it does have a certain beauty to it. It's always like, ooh, nice.
Yeah, for sure. If you know what you're looking for sure.
Yeah. One of the weird things is I even feel that way on the receiving end. If we're in training, I'm always happy to be part of a good technique, even if I'm at the wrong end of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another weird thing about martial arts is eventually the ego starts to erode, and you're like, you get a good one, and you're like bleeding out of your mouth, but you're smiling like, bro, dude, that was great.
It's one of the wonderful things about when you're in student does it to you as well, because that way your ego can't lose. So they hit you, think I taught them that.
I taught you. That reflects on me. So I know that some of my listeners, a lot of them actually, are going to be jiu-jitsu guys, are going to be MMA guys, people that don't do the so-called traditional martial arts. If they were to say something like, hey, since you have like these phases, these stages or drills that kind of work your way up to your kata-based sparring, why do you still need to like practice the solo kata? Like, what would you say to somebody who raises that objection?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. I wouldn't say you need to do it, but there are advantages to doing it. So one advantage is look at the amount of people who are now suddenly inventing solo drills because we're on lockdown. Mm-hmm. And people can't train. Well, we've already got them. So that's one advantage. One reason they're there is on the occasions where you can't train with a partner, simply because it's early in the morning, it's late at night, your partner hasn't shown up, or global pandemics. Whatever the reason, you've got a way of supplementary solo training. So that's one thing that they give us, and that's one reason why we do them. The other reason is obviously we want to preserve that continuity of knowledge as well. We don't just want to get the map and then rip up the map for the next generation. We want to pass it on. But one function that it can serve is because a lot of the techniques I'll circle back around to this, but one of the things that most martial artists don't realize is they're always practicing wrong. All of us are, because we practice techniques that are designed to harm and hurt people, but we always want to leave the dojo or the gym without anyone getting harmed or hurt. No one wants to be calling the ambulance every single session. So we're always making some compromises in the name of safety, whether that's protective equipment or rules or just some kind of agreements or going light. And that's a good and moral thing to do. But the trouble with that is that there's an ever-present fault there. So one of the things that Kata can help do is it can help correct that fault, because we can visualize doing the technique with full intent. So if I've got a technique where I smash my partner in the throat, for example, or I smash the enemy in the throat, when I'm doing it with a partner, I'm always going to do it with control, right? And when I do it against the pad, I can hit the pad hard, but it's a pad. You know what I mean? It's not a person. Yeah. When I do the kata, what I can do is I can visualize doing it against a real human being. So that visualization can be very effective. Combined with the actual movement can also help as well. But I would never say that people need to do kata. But the reason we do it is for that continuation of the knowledge. It gives us a supplementary solo training, and it gives us a chance to practice with real intent. That's why we would do them.
That's a good answer. And on the visualization, there's a lot of you have to be careful with that. There's a lot of evidence that the visualization is really good for you. But the one caveat I would toss in there, and I'm sure you don't disagree, is that you do need that live experience to understand what it is you're trying to visualize before, because you don't want to try and visualize something in a vacuum, so to speak. I know that when I was coming up in the ranks, that was kind of what happened, because we didn't do a lot of sparring. People would say, imagine an opponent while you're doing your pumse, and I would be imagining stuff out of, the Iron Monkey, whatever Kung Fu movie I had watched last weekend. And that's what I was imagining in my head as I did my pumse. So.
Yes, and I totally get that, and that's a brilliant point, because that's the cycle that's supposed to happen. So through your live practice, when you come back to doing the kata, all those memories and experiences have been triggered when you do it. So it's a way to reinforce the partner training as well. But if you've not done that, you can't get that element of benefit from the kata itself. So the idea is they constantly feed into one another. And it's different as well. When I see people who really do get their applications and have drilled it live properly, when they do the kata, they are in their mind, they are fighting. You can see it. They believe in it. And then you get the other guy who can do the kata where it looks very pretty, but it lacks that grit. There's something missing about it. It looks hollow and tinny. And I put it down to the fact that they haven't had the experiences that can inform it. So it's missing that depth. It's like, I guess, the difference between like a good actor and a good actor will draw on real emotion, and a bad actor will try and fake it. You know what I mean? So I would agree completely that's what it is. But I mean, we do the same thing. I think most martial arts will have some form of solo practice, but again, it needs to be a supplement to the live partner practice.
Yeah, supplementally being the key word, not your key training method.
No, absolutely not. Because again, if the objective is to be able to apply these techniques live, then we need to practice them live. And I think that's sometimes where karate goes wrong a little bit as well. you would go to a lot of dojos and they would spend hours and hours and hours and hours on the kata. It's like looking at the surface of the cover of the book and never reading it.
Right.
You know, and we learn far less than most people as well. You know, by the time my students have got to fourth dan, which takes a very long time, they've only learnt 10 kata. You know, which is very, and up to first dan they learn 6. And that typically takes 8 years. 8 years to learn 6 forms, and they're all short as well. So it's learning them in depth and practicing in that way. You know, that link to life is always there.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. So my last question is, this is more aimed at people that might still be skeptical, not from like a boxing or a jiu-jitsu standpoint, but from a traditional standpoint. Do you think there's room or actually even a need for modern training methods to be introduced and integrated into traditional martial arts?
100%. Yeah. And that's traditional.
Right. It is actually.
Because this is why I sometimes I get more criticism from within the traditionalist camp than I do from outside of it. You know, and sometimes some of the criticism I get is because of the introduction of modern kit and modern training methods and modern ideas. But if you look at the history of it, not one single generation. So I'll talk about karate because that's the art I know. But
I lost you there.
You're just coming back in sounding a little bit robotic. Are we okay? Let me check.
Yeah, I hear you now. Sorry.
The joys of Skype. No, so where was I? Yeah. I get more criticism from within the traditional camp than I do from outside it, and sometimes that's because of bringing in these modern training methods and things. But if you look at the old masters, not a single one of them passed it on in the exact same way it was taught to them. If you think of any field of study, the way it advances is each generation goes, okay, this is what we've got. Now you go ahead and improve it. And that's what I want to do. You know, I love what's been passed on to me. I want to do what I can to make it better. And then I'll pass it on to the next generation on the full understanding that they'll do the same thing. It's a falsehood to think that traditional martial arts have remained the same for thousands of years. They've not. They've constantly evolved.
Right, absolutely. Awesome, cool. So a resounding yes to that answer.
yeah. It was, but even then, you know, I remember I was on Stefan Kestin's podcast, and we ended up talking about a similar thing. And I made the point that we do a lot of work with focus mitts in the dojo, loads of work on focus mitts. And some traditionalists don't like them because they'll go, no, like the makiwara, the striking post is our traditional thing. And I think, but the only reason they did that is because that's all they had. I'm certain that if I could go back in time and say, look, here's some focus mitts with this modern high density foam, that they would have adapted them. And I would now be practicing traditional focus mitt drills. So my aim is to create those and pass them on until that bit of kit is superseded by the next thing. You know, it should always be evolving and improving. That's just like, I mean, what other field of human endeavor believed it reached perfection in the 1940s? I mean, who wants a 1940s car or a 1940s house? You know, we all acknowledge just things keep improving over time. And I think we've all got to do our bit to try and do that, you know. And I think within the traditional circle, sometimes that's looked as, oh, who are you to say you know more than the old masters? But that, I always like this, John of Salisbury made that comment where he said, if I can see so far, it's because I am a dwarf standing on the shoulders of giants. Right. Well, so my objective is to be that dwarf. I'm not saying I'm a giant. I'm saying they've already given me everything they knew. So if I can push it forwards that little bit, you know, then I'm sure they'll thank me for it.
Sure. And we're also operating on, I mean, this is the whole point of combat learning is to inject modern training methods, especially research-based scientific training methods into the martial arts, whether it's traditional or jiu-jitsu. It's all plagued by various levels of tradition and bad ideas about learning and motor learning. And it's definitely, we're drawing on just years and years of literature, scientific literature and practical experience. We're not just saying, hey, I know more. I mean, we're actually learning from people that have just profoundly more experience than we do, and we're just consolidating it.
Yeah, and then that's, this is where, I know that's your field, but I think it is, if we can all find better, more efficient ways of doing things, then obviously we should do what we can to adopt those. I can't quite follow why anyone wouldn't. Sometimes in the traditional circles there's an idea of keeping something pure, but once you realize that pure thing never existed in the first place, it's a myth.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's always been evolving and changing. And always, every generation has tried to make it better. Then we should try and do the same thing. And we're really lucky in this age as well, because you and I have an ocean between us, but here we are chatting in real time. Right. The ability to share information has never been better. So I personally, I know I don't believe martial arts have ever been better either. Because people sharing these ideas, and still there's always pockets of resistance and stuff. But I think overall, we're all heading in the right direction, because people can swap ideas, and over time, it's the good ideas that tend to win out, I think.
Yeah, totally agreed. Martial arts is in another renaissance. It is going and generally going the right way, and it's so much better than it used to be, with everybody collaborating and training methods continuing to improve, people trying new and different things. It's an exciting time to be alive.
Oh yeah, 100%. There's weird things. Like I remember that what really brought this home to me is I was teaching down at the club. We'd done a pad drill that I think people might like that. So I filmed a quick clip of it and I put it on Twitter. This is the drill that we did tonight, or one of the drills we did tonight. I wake up the next morning and a guy in Canada had footage of him teaching the same drill to his students that night. So I thought that drill went from my home in Northern England and was being taught in Canada within 12 hours. You know what I mean? It's incredible how quickly things can move now. And you think in the pre-internet age, how long would that have taken to happen? Decades.
A whole ship ride. Yeah, man, dude, this has been an awesome episode. I think this is my favorite one so far.
Oh, thank you.
I want to be respectful of your time. I'm operating on no hours of sleep, so I gotta hop off here and get ready so I can go back to my my temporary third shift until the COVID thing is all done with. But thank you so much for coming on the Combat Learning Podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. No, I've enjoyed this. It's been fun talking to you. So thank you very much for making it happen.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback, you can email me at josh@combatlearning.com or send me a message on facebook.com/combatlearning. Now, real quick before I go, can I ask you a huge favor? If you got value from this episode, leave us a review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcasting platform is. So many shows pop up and fizzle out. And we're talking about stuff that nobody else is talking about, and we want to stick around. So leaving us a review helps us a ton. Finally, the show is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.